Hey, it is a rainy day. No camping going on this weekend. I thought about it, just getting out in the cool air, but not this time. Maybe another time. I have some things I want to do, and one of the things I want to get accomplished before fall camping is I wanted to put some heavier duty and some new springs onto my YJ so that I can pull my camping trailer with a little less sag in the back. Welcome back to another episode of Eric's Camping Adventures. So before you start, just a few things you're going to need. You're going to need a 3/4 inch socket impact wrench. You're going to need a 22 millimeter socket impact wrench. You might need some Loctite. You will need a grinder. I saw some folks who did this with a plasma cutter, but I just don't happen to have a plasma cutter laying around my garage, so we're going to use a grinder. You're going to need some jack stands. You're going to need maybe a couple jacks and some wheel chocks. Keep this safe. You want to get this done and get back out on the trail or to the campsite. You don't want to be in the emergency room, so safety first. So I'm going to chock my wheels first. I'm going to do that inner on the opposite side so it can't roll. I'm just doing one side at a time on this. I'll show you what I mean. The next step is your jack and jack stand. Don't skip this step. You got to have some jack stands to do this. You don't want this thing coming down on you. A slow leak in your old jack. Make sure that jack stand is square on the frame. That looks pretty good to me, so we're just going to move on forward from here. Next thing is to disconnect your shock. It's actually pretty important. You want free travel of the axle, so getting that shock off of there is going to be pretty essential. Just going to rethread my bolt and my nut. Don't lose everything. I'm going to just hang it right out there in the bottom of the shock. I'm going to do some final prep here because once I get started I want to keep moving here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wire brush the bolts on the bottom of the spring plate just so there's less resistance when I go to impact them off. I'm going to just loosen the bolts on the plate so there's a little more give in the system as I'm working, just avoiding things springing back. So I'm to the point of removing the bolts from the bushings of the spring, and I'm just going to be honest with you. I watched a guy on Jeep Solid, and he was a very valiant man who worked hard and pounded his bolts out that were rusted. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use a grinder, and I'm going to grind between the bushing and the mount, and we're going to get this out. We're going to do very minimal damage to the mount, and hopefully no damage to ourselves. This was the way I did it. There are some things that are inherently unsafe with the grinder. Did it on the driver's side, no problem. Let's get into this one and see what happens. Grinder safety. If you make adjustments on the grinder, always unplug it, because when you go to grasp the grinder, every grinder has a switch where you would grasp it to choke up on it. So always unplug it. And two, get your safety glasses on. I'll show you something I've done here. I do not want to grind my spring down. What I want to do is just go straight for the bushing and bolt. So I have pounded a punch to separate the frame mount from the spring so that the blade will fit in nicely. So at this point, I'm going to replace my blade. Blade is worn down enough that it's not reaching efficiently, and trying to jam it in there makes you get it kind of offline, out of the plane. Chance of wedging and blowing up your cutting blade is pretty significant. So safety first here. Going to put the other jack stand in so it doesn't jump down, hit the grinder, and cut my hand. I was using a grinder with pretty good safety. I standing on the cord, keeping it out of the way so it wouldn't get caught. And Michelle came outside and was trying to get my attention over the sound of the grinder, and she kept getting louder and louder. So I thought there was an emergency, and I looked up and brought my hand up right into the grinder. That was a couple stitches. So just watch your safety. So that one's done. That's the hardest one to get to. And now we'll move on to the back shack. If you're thinking you can unbolt these and pound them out, you know, you're gonna take a risk of hurting yourself, being really frustrated. I think this is easier. It's not the neatest and cleanest, but definitely for me, it turned out to be worth the risk so far. It's a recommendation. Don't wear shorts when you use a grinder. Make sure you got pant legs that cover your socks. You don't get a spark down in your sock. I've done all these things and learned the hard way. That's rubber bushing smoking. All right, both spring bolts are cut, so the next step is to pull the bolts off the plate. Before I do anything else, I'm going to wire brush my plates and U-bolts, and I'm going to paint them so that they are actually drying while I'm doing the rest of this stuff. Those bolts are exactly the right size. I had to run around a little bit to get them yesterday when I did the driver's side, and ends up being a 14 millimeter or 9/16 or and a half in the back. They're not the same. Got to make sure you get the right distance, and probably need to make sure you grease these well before you stick them in. I'm not sure how much that really helps long term, but at least you get it started in the right direction. Hardest part of disassembly is the spring bolts. The hardest part of assembly is getting the spring perch to line up with the hole on the spring to get it to seat properly. Probably have to use a ratchet strap to get that right. We'll just see how this goes. I'm going to have to use a ratchet strap to pull it forward about 1/4 of an inch. So, you can look at the spring perch. spring hole. Everything is flushed and lined up, so all we got to do is jack up the axle and line up those 2 points. So here we go. And make sure I'm going to grease that bolt first and then slide it in. This is not a complex process here. And then most of this is done. You're going to snug things up once you get it back on the ground. That's the instructions I've seen for all this, is make sure you snug it up when it's all on the ground. Put a little blue thread locker on there, mainly because these are not the original bolts. I think that's it.